Today I'm going to be changing the strings on my 4-string Solar bass guitar. Solar AB2.4BOP. I'm also going to do my 5-string eventually here because I'm doing some recording for a band that I play bass in called 72 Legions. And we play in drop C and then standard 7-string tuning on guitar. Then that's when I switch to the 5-string. And as usual, I'll be using SIT strings. So I was thinking recently, it's 2023, my first real band started in 1993. So I have been involved in the death metal underground for 30 years, which is crazy to think about. My first band was called Ton. We started in 1993. I believe it was June of 1993 we got together for the first time. Jeff Shepler and I had been playing together and just sharing stuff with each other and learning from each other, and also played in a couple of short-lived band situations together. And Kevin Kraft, the drummer, who I knew from the time I was a kid, I played on a football team where his dad was the coach. He was a couple years younger than me. He was a drummer, and we eventually all hooked up and started jamming together. So I believe that was June of 1993. And I think by July we were like, okay, we're doing this. And I believe we jammed together for probably 3-4 weeks. And then we brought in a friend of ours, Paul Bennett, who was playing the other guitar in the band. So that was the start of it. And yeah, we practiced in an old schoolhouse. Kevin had played in some cover bands and stuff and had a room in an old schoolhouse. There was a guy that lived in the schoolhouse with his family, and he rented out rooms to bands. And it was cool in the way that we had an entire classroom to practice in, which was cool because it was very spacious. There was no air conditioning or heat, and we're from Ohio, so in the winter got damn cold in there. And we started off using kerosene heaters, which, to think about that now, that we were heating our room with kerosene heaters with no ventilation. You know, we'd go home after practice and you'd blow your nose and it'd be black from the just burning the kerosene in a room. So that's kind of wild to think about. Eventually down the road, we ended up getting some, like a propane type torpedo heater, which was much cleaner. But, you know, looking back, really doing anything like that in a room with no ventilation is probably not the best idea. But it worked for us, and we were there for, man, I think it was like 13 years. But when we formed the band, I don't think any of us really knew anything about death metal. We were into thrash metal, you know, the classic, the 80s thrash metal, and we loved that. And even when Pantera's Vulgar Display of Power came out, we were totally into that. So when we the very first guy, as heavy as we could be within what we knew, which was mostly thrash metal and, you know, some traditional heavy metal stuff too. The other guys were a little more into that than I was, but that was all our influence. And so we started writing songs, and Jeff and I already had some stuff, I believe, kind of together. And I don't remember, you know, what the first song was that we actually played as a band, but I do know that we had some friends that did know about death metal and the death metal underground. And so they started hanging out with us. We started hanging out with them, and they'd come down to the practice room. And I remember hearing Cannibal Corpse for the first time, and that was probably the first time I had heard a band that just had all guttural vocals all the time. And at first I wasn't real sure what to think about it, but as I was hearing more and more of that style, I think we all started just kind of thinking, okay, we want to go in a heavier, more brutal direction. And so, you know, we started discovering other bands like Morbid Angel and Suffocation, and I started listening to Obituary and Bolt Thrower pretty early on. And so that was, you know, that all came into play very quickly. So we wrote and recorded our first demo, which we called What Is Heavy. Not in the way that was like, oh, this is what's heavy. It was more like in the way of, what is heavy, you know? It's like everybody thinks of it differently. You know, whether it's just total brutal death metal, or, you know, nowadays some people are more into deathcore, or what, that's heavy to them. But anyway, I guess the point is that those songs were not death metal. They were the heaviest versions of what we knew how to do at the time. And actually we had that, we sent the tapes away and had them converted into, the songs converted into WAV files a few years ago. And when I listened back, it was really cool and weird and crazy, because I had not heard those songs in so long. I mean, I had a copy of that demo, but I haven't even owned a cassette player in years. So, I mean, I had not heard that stuff in years. And when I listen back, like, I've debated on making it available online, but overall, do I think it was great? No, but at the same time, it was just what we were doing at the time. And so listening back to it and remembering that period of time is pretty cool. And I was actually surprised, because I actually enjoyed the music more than I thought I would. You know, it's more of a nostalgia thing for me. But, you know, once we did that demo pretty quickly, probably within the same year, probably 93. And so we moved on from that very quickly. And our next demo, which was called Crushing Design, was death metal, and it's available on YouTube. I believe I uploaded it. And so, you know, there's a pretty drastic difference from demo number 1 to demo number 2. And oh shit, I gotta be careful. A screw fell out of this, and this one saddle might go flying out. And, you know, so I remember we were wanting to start to play shows, and at that time, you know, 1993, early 94, we had some friends in a band called Drogheda, which was kind of a grindcore band. They weren't from our same our town, but very close, and good friends of ours. And they're the ones that turned us on to death metal the most, and made me aware of the death metal underground and demo trading and all that stuff, which I'm still thankful for to this day, because that was very, very cool to me to get involved in that, where you could just send your music all over the world. You know, you didn't have to have a record label, or just do it on your own. I mean, yeah, it was small time stuff. It was labor intensive, because you had to write letters by hand and go to the post office and, you know, all that stuff. But to me, as usual, when I'm doing this, I'm misplacing everything because I'm busy talking. Okay, there's this. But to me, that was a lot of fun, because, you know, to go to my mailbox and I've got a package from, I don't know, Italy. Or probably the craziest one, I think, was, I remember I traded with Beheaded, and it came from Malta, and I had never even heard of Malta at that time. That was probably, you know, that was probably a few years down the road, actually. But yeah, so I was like, where the heck is that at? And what's funny is David from Beheaded, maybe within the last year or so, actually sent me a picture of a handwritten letter that I had written to him in the 90s. It's crazy. But yeah, so that was cool, because you could just get your music out there on your own. It was slow, because, you know, yeah, you had to wait for the mail, and, you know, yeah, it took a lot of time, and it's not like today where everything's instant, but it was still a way to get your music out there. And, you know, years later down the road, when we reformed the band, you know, we were never got to be a super popular band or anything, but you know, we did have some releases on some labels and stuff. So I mean, there were some people out there that knew who we were. And I was actually shocked when we brought the band back after being inactive for a very, very long time. I was actually surprised at how many people remembered us and were interested in what we were doing. And you know, that all came directly from writing all those letters and all those trips to the post office. And because if we wouldn't have done that, then nobody would have known who we were. I mean, you know, Pathos Productions had down the road released a CD of a couple of our demos, and we were on United Guttural Records. So I mean, all that helped for sure. But you know, earlier on, it was just us, and mainly me, writing the letters and putting the packages together. But it was cool and it was fun. And I don't know why I have a memory of, I remember trading demos with Skinless, and I remember getting the package, and I think they might have had like a rubber stamp for like the return address. And I remember thinking, you know, just a long time ago, I was just like, oh, that's pretty cool. I wonder how I can do that. So you'd have the band logo, and actually I don't think I ever did do that, but it was cool. And I remember listening to that demo and, you know, taking it down to the practice room, all of us cracking up over the song titles and the all the samples on the songs. They had a lot of samples, and you know, it's just funny shit. And so yeah, that was all really cool, and it helped get the band name out there. And that's probably, you know, how we ended up getting some shows and getting labels to want to do stuff with us. Like, I'll never forget, I remember I'd seen Flesh Grind live and I'd met Rich, and I remember when he called me on the phone. To this day I still don't know how he got my phone number. He called me on the phone asking if we wanted to put our full-length album out on his new label, United Guttural Records. And I thought that was super cool, because I was a huge fan of Flesh Grind, and the fact that he called me and was interested in us, because it goes back further, because I had traded demos with him. And I remember I sent him our What Is Heavy demo, which is not death metal, and I remember getting the Flesh Grind demo, and I was like, oh god, this guy probably thinks, what the hell is this band? And because, you know, they were just so far beyond what we were at that time with the heaviness. But I did meet him one time, and they were playing in Cleveland, and I remember the first thing he said to me is, he goes, what the fuck is heavy? Because that was our first demo. And then later on, when I was talking to Joe from Broken Hope, I remember he said that Rich, and he and Rich lived close by each other, and Rich had played him that demo. And it was another time where I was like, oh god, I wonder what he was thinking, because, you know, Broken Hope was way beyond what we were at that point in time, you know, as far as heaviness. But it's just cool stuff. And you know, Joe was super cool. Actually, we opened that show, and he was super cool to us, and it was cool to meet him, and you know, spend a little time hanging out with Rich too. Rest in peace to both of those guys, actually. So I don't know, time goes on, we're playing shows. I remember Jeff had set up a few shows, and one of the shows, he had set up a show for Internal Bleeding. They were coming through on their way to somewhere else probably, and down the road, Chris returned the favor by bringing us out to New York, which I think I've told this story before. Brought us out to New York for our first out-of-state show, and you know, once again, we're feeling like, holy shit, do we even belong here? You know, we were getting heavier, but I think we were still on our first demo at that point in time. Like, we had heavier music, and we were about to record our Crushing Design demo, but all we had at that show was the What Is Heavy demo, which at that point wasn't really all that representative of what we were doing, because we had been progressing and getting heavier and going more in the death metal direction. But you know, we played this show with 8 or 10 death metal bands. We were in about the middle of the lineup. You know, when we played, there weren't a ton of people there, but because it was kind of early, but there were enough. And I remember we had the first mosh pit of the day, even though it was only a few people. It was fucking cool, because we were like, holy shit, maybe we do belong here. So that was a lot of fun, and we got to meet some cool people, play with some cool bands. Oppressor, Internal Bleeding, Infestation, Ossuary. I remember getting their Fat, I think we got their Fat demo. I think it was a demo. And we listened to that just because the vocals were so sick. Well, the whole thing was sick. You know, I'm not sure, that was probably 94-ish. Probably 94. So that was a really cool experience. And, you know, you get an experience like that and you want to keep doing that sort of thing. So we did a lot of Weekend Warrior stuff, traveled around just on the weekends. We never actually went on tour, which looking back at it, I kind of wish maybe we would have taken the initiative to do that. But, you know, we were just learning as we went. You didn't have the internet to see what everybody else was doing, to kind of follow the lead of the bands that were being successful. And, you know, when I look back, like, you know, I talked to J-Dog from Hell's Headbangers a few times, and there's actually an interview on his channel with me. And we're just one of those bands that, like, yes, some people knew who we were. We had some fans, some people got into what we did, but we also are one of those bands that kind of always flew under the radar a little bit. And even when I hear a lot of people talk about their influences and stuff, they talk about a lot of the bands from our era, and we rarely ever get mentioned. Although the Sanguisugabog guys have mentioned us and supported us and said that we had influenced them, which is really cool. But, and you know, for a long time, I wasn't really sure why exactly that was, but when I look back at it, I think I know why it was. I think that some of these other bands, yes, they were good to start off, but, you know, they took more of the initiative to get the sick merch and the sick artwork, and whereas we never really did that. Like, I guess we just kind of felt like we didn't know where to go for that stuff at the time, and so we just, I don't know, we just kind of settled for what was there. And also, you know, because if you have that sick artwork and people are seeing your album with that sick art, they're like, whoa, I gotta check that out. And yeah, we just never really had that. And that's our fault. And another thing is we never actually went on tour. We did a lot of Weekend Warrior stuff, which was a lot of fun, but we never actually went on tour, and a lot of these other bands did. And I think a combination of those two things, well, and also the name of the band, Ton. That does not sound death metal. Our logo was pretty hard lined, where it was like, didn't look death metal. So if you just saw the name, you might not know what we were about and maybe wouldn't check it out. So, you know, it's just a combination of all those things, and, you know, things just play out how they play out, and it's all good. But, yeah, so that band, we put out 4 demo tapes. We did a full-length album, which was released on United Guttural Records, and then we split up. I remember the year before we split up, we did a lot of cool shit. We played all over the place, played some cool fests, had a lot of fun, but ultimately, I believe it was early 2001 we split up. And we all continued to play and do other things. Jeff went on to form a band called Fully Consumed. Kevin and we played briefly in a band called One Enemy. That's very short-lived. It was very cool, but very short-lived. We had a band called National Collapse, which lasted a little longer, but ultimately fell apart. And Kevin and I spent a lot of time writing music. And I mean, we never took a break. Like, we never took a period of time off. We always kept going at it and writing music. And I remember we didn't have a bass player for a long time, so we didn't play out for a long time. But, you know, fast forward, I end up joining Jeff's band, Fully Consumed, probably like, well, that would have been like 12 years after Ton broke up. So I'm playing with those guys, which was a lot of fun, very intense music. And then we were still doing the National Collapse thing, and Jeff was filling in on bass. And ultimately that fell apart, and, you know, Kevin and Jeff and I were still hanging out, playing music, and so we reformed Ton and did a lot of other things. You know, released 2 more albums, played Chicago Domination Fest, played Las Vegas Death Fest twice, played Full Terror Assault. Did some cool stuff and had a lot of fun doing it. And so we reformed in, I believe it was the very, very end of 2013, and then we called it quits again in early 2020, right before the pandemic hit. So yeah, I had a lot of fun in that band, and that was my first real band, so you know, it's really close to my heart. I put a lot into it, so did the other guys. But you know, things change, time marches on, and so you know, 30 years later, I'm just like, the fire still burns inside of me. I know I've said that before in videos too. It's just, I love music, I love metal, I love death metal. I have a death metal band called Mutual Hostility. I play in a death metal slash thrash slash melodic death metal band where I play bass called 72 Legions. And I'm also playing guitar in a pretty hard, heavily, a band that's pretty heavily influenced by hardcore. And that's cool too, because that's a little different than what I'd done in the past. So it's fun to play. So yeah. Some things coming up, going on tour with 72 Legions, opening for Venom Inc. Dead Earth has some shows lined up on the East Coast and Indiana, Cleveland, and a couple of things lined up for next year also. So I'm going to be out there playing guitar and playing bass. So keep an eye out, and I hope to see you somewhere.